You are listening to an After Dinner Conversation magazine podcast. After Dinner Conversation believes humanity is improved by ethics and morals grounded in philosophical truth, and that truth is discovered through intentional reflection and respectful debate. In order to facilitate this process, we have created a growing series of print books, a monthly short story magazine, and 2 different podcasts. This podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Audiobooks, provides audiobook recordings of stories that have appeared in our magazine, and our companion podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Discussions, is where we discuss the ethics of the choices made in the stories as a way to model the kinds of discussions we hope you're having about these readings with friends, family, or students. We would love it if you would over to check it out. I'm Roberta, your narrator and one of the acquisition editors at After Dinner Conversation Publishing. Thank you for spending your time listening to our podcast and for reading the magazine. Thank you for supporting us through your magazine subscriptions and through patreon.com/afterdinnerconversation. And of course, if you enjoy this audiobook reading, please subscribe to our podcast, share it on social media, and suggest it to friends. Today's story is Echo, written by Jenna Glover and published in our March 2021 magazine. I think you're focused too much on this. Names are just arbitrary titles handed to us by others. Why should this one matter? Because it's not my name. It's not even a name. You need to start thinking of it as your name. It doesn't feel like me. And which me is that? What? The me I've always been, Martha. Martha is dead. Martha first knew something was wrong when she weighed herself after the new year. She had started weighing herself the first few years of her marriage. Back then, she and Robert were still in the honeymoon phase, and she was determined to maintain her petite 115-pound figure for his pleasure. A decade later, and several pounds heavier, it became an obligation for health, not vanity. Then the war started. Martha didn't weigh herself at all during those 3 years. How could she when there were androids to find and to destroy? The world had moved on to bigger priorities, and she did as well. Her weight would not save mankind from its own creations. The war ended a year ago, and Martha spent that year attending holidays, gatherings, and celebrating the first Freedom Festival without any thought to her figure whatsoever. The Freedom Festival lasted for 7 days and was celebrated with food and lots of it. Martha, a true patriot of humanity, did not shy away from such festivities. After the food was consumed and everyone trickled back to work, Martha inevitably felt the burden of her overindulgence. It was time to get back on the scale. Martha stepped onto the tile scale after she brushed her teeth one morning, casual as can be. It wasn't a big deal. She was only 38. How high could it have gone, really? If she didn't like the number, then it wouldn't be that difficult to fix it. When Martha glanced down at the backlit, blinking screen, she frowned. That couldn't be right. She stepped off, let the tile reset itself, and stepped back on. No change. Martha ripped off her clothing, stripping down to her underwear, and read the same number again. With a huff, Martha chalked it up to the scale being broken. Lots of technologies were failing now that the androids weren't in charge. No one would admit it, but those genocidal revolutionaries were better at running the world than the humans ever were. Martha slid back into her clothes, taking a moment to note the measurements on the tags, and, satisfied that it was an error in manufacturing, left the bathroom for work. She couldn't stop thinking, though, that the scale could have read something as absurd as 205. You're very quiet today. Just thinking. What about? They held the funeral today. Oh, how does that make you feel? I wish it were me. Martha pressed the pad of her finger against the sensor on her halo vanity and waited. She winced slightly at the prick of the needle, and then the blast of cold antiseptic. A blinking green light appeared on the mirror surface, and she removed her finger, automatically sticking it in her mouth even though the tiny prick would have healed already. She watched the mirror. The dot blinked over and over, but didn't turn. Martha sighed. She wanted the test to be positive. She wanted to be pregnant. Caleb was her world, but he was 4 now, and Martha thought another baby, a sibling for Caleb to play with, would be good for all of them. Caleb was born just before the uprising, and once that happened, babies were the last thing on anyone's mind. It was all just a haze of chaos and business associated with the war and the cleanup. Martha's own maternity leave was cut short, and she could barely remember her first year as a mother. But now all that was over, and Martha wanted to experience motherhood for real. She broached the subject with Robert, and he was in agreement. They had been trying for months now. Martha could have sworn she was pregnant with Caleb the second Robert looked at her. She knew she was older now, but she had been taking those fertility pills for a while. Surely they must have had some effect by now. The green light blinked one last time, and a beep sounded. The mirror's surface displayed a myriad of facts and figures about her blood work, but Martha skipped over all of it, looking for the one section she actually needed. Pregnancy. Negative. Martha stared at the reading for a few seconds before swiping her hand across the mirror, returning the picture to her own face. A baby. She should be able to have one. Other women her age and older were having babies. Martha wondered if she should go see a doctor. She hadn't been to see a doctor in years. But the hospitals were so chaotic now, operations barely back up since eliminating all the corrupted data. Lines of people to see too few doctors. Martha didn't even know if fertility clinics were still open. Perhaps all non-essential medical needs were still closed. Martha met her own eyes in the mirror. Perhaps she was just broken. From downstairs, Martha heard the front door open and the sound of Robert's shoes on the entry floor. She quickly accessed the Halo Vanities data center and deleted all her files for the last several weeks so Robert couldn't see the results. She would tell Robert herself later. This doesn't have to be such a tragedy. This could be the beginning of a new life. You'll find and meet new people. I don't want new people, but I want my son. Martha collapsed at work on a Wednesday afternoon, the week before her wedding anniversary. One minute she was typing away on her screens, organizing files and answering requests. The next minute she was peering up at the face of a man she didn't recognize in a place she didn't recognize. The man sat back with a gentle smile, allowing Martha all the time she needed to sit up and get her bearings. She was on what appeared to be a hospital bed, wearing a hospital gown, but the room was quite different. There were monitors and screens everywhere, and not one of them looked like it functioned for medical purposes. Further, Martha herself didn't feel ill or hurt or even confused. It was like she merely went to sleep for... She glanced out the window and noted that it was dark. Hours. Martha glanced at the man, or doctor, who merely continued to smile and then peered down at herself. That was when she noticed the wires protruding from her arms. Martha must have made some sort of sound or movement because the man came forward too quickly to place a hand on her shoulder. Now, he said, there's no need for that. Martha ignored him and for the second time that day lost track of a few hours. Where were you when it started? I'm sorry? The San Jose slaughter. Everyone remembers where they were when the androids first attacked. I was here, working on a paper. It was late. Why do you bring this up? I just realized that I don't know where I was. Meaning? Just that. I don't know. The government doesn't know. Was I already there, eating dinner with Robert and Caleb and pretending all was fine? Or did I not exist at all? Martha sat on the bed, the words of the doctors and government workers and engineers washing over her and forming a background static. She looked down at her hands, wiggling her fingers, touching the tips together, and wondering how could these not be real hands? Ma'am? Martha looked into the smiling faces of the people in front of her. They always called her ma'am. No one called her Martha, or even Mrs. Billings, just ma'am. Do you have any questions? The woman nearest to her asked. What's happening? How could this be happening? Who am I? The doctor or government agent or engineer, Martha couldn't tell the difference. They were all wearing the same suits, smiled and laughed. That's all right, she said. We'll be here as your rehabilitation team for the duration. We'll guide you through step by step, and you can stop and ask any questions you like along the way. I know this is a lot to take in now. Martha nodded and then rasped out, Could I just have a minute alone? Everyone suddenly tensed, throwing each other meaningful looks, and Martha thought they were going to say no, put her in cuffs, lock her away. But then the woman who had spoken spread her arms and began herding the others towards the door. Of course, she said, as she too backed out. Just call if you need anything. We'll be back in a minute. As soon as she heard the door click, Martha fell apart. Her breath came in great heaving gasps, and there never seemed to be enough of it. And how could that be right, because she wasn't even real? There was no need for air, no real lungs to breathe it in or real heart to pump it through her blood. Martha stood abruptly, a marionette having its strings yanked, her body an attachment to her consciousness and nothing more. She needed to know, for sure, once and for all, what was she? Martha glanced around the room and saw some sort of tool on a table opposite. She had no idea what it did, but it would serve its purpose. She sprang toward it, snatching it up, and before she could even think about what she was doing, she plunged it into her arm. Can I ask you a question? Certainly. If I'm dead, you're not dead. Martha Billings is dead. Right, but is Martha, experiencing the afterlife, heaven and such? You have her memories. What do you think? Yes, there you have it. Can I ask you another question? Sure. Will I go to heaven too? We repaired the damage done. There won't even be a scar. Furthermore, we finished repairing the degradation that caused your collapses in the first place. You're good as new. The doctor snapped his screen shut and smiled across at Martha. Do you have any questions? He asked after a minute. I want to see my family. The doctor sighed. You will, soon, but there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be sorted first. It's not as easy as it is for humans. Martha blinked at the sudden realization that human was a category she no longer belonged in. Silence fell. Martha rubbed the perfectly smooth skin of her arm. The blood that came forth when she stabbed herself was beautiful to her eyes, even as the pain hit and she doubled over in agony. But then came the hard resistance as she hit something impenetrable, metallic and man-made, materials peeking out from a thin layer of skin and muscle and vein, android materials. Ma'am, Martha glanced up. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Audrey Meng, our specialist in android psychiatry. For the first time, Martha noticed a woman standing beside the doctor. She was tall, fit, and completely inoffensive in every way, from her neat and professional hairstyle to her earth-tone pencil skirt and sweater blouse. She inclined her head when the doctor said her name and smiled, revealing a set of perfectly straight white teeth. Hello, ma'am, Dr. Meng said. You and I are scheduled to meet once a week for 2 hours every Friday afternoon. My offices are located on the 5th floor. You can, of course, schedule more meetings with me with the approval of your rehabilitation leader. I'm not suicidal, Martha blurted out bluntly. Dr. Meng blinked, but Martha plowed ahead. I wasn't trying to kill myself. I just wanted to see if it was true. Dr. Meng smiled again. That's good, but I'm not here because we thought you were suicidal. All newly aware androids are required to undergo extensive counseling throughout their transitions and beyond. It's standard procedure. Oh, how many others are there? Martha asked. I mean, other newly aware androids. Dr. Meng hesitated for a second, and Martha's mind struggled with the concept that she was the only android left active. Logically, she couldn't be the only one, right? There were standard procedures. You couldn't make standard procedures unless there were multiple cases. We generally don't encourage newly awares to associate with other androids right away, Dr. Meng finally said. However, there are more. We are getting better at locating possible androids, but given the complexity of android technology, we may never know how many humans were replaced with android units. Of the ones like you, there are probably hundreds in the nation, thousands across the globe. Like me, pedestrian, non-combat oriented, and safe to exist. And the others, the combat-oriented androids, you don't need to worry about those. What's that on your finger? Huh? Oh, a wedding ring. We talked about this. It's not hers. I had to return that. I bought this for me. Why? I'm not allowed to marry. I thought if I had something that represented, a relationship, that it wouldn't feel so bad to be alone. Sounds like you're trying to substitute that ring for a real interaction. No, it's just something to help me remember what it was like to be loved, in case I start to forget. All right, let's see about getting through this as quickly as possible. We can be on our way. Mr. Park, a representative from the World Government's North American branch for Android Affairs, shuffled his folders, lining them up opposite Martha on the desk. There was a security guard at the door who never lifted his eyes from Martha. All right, Mr. Park said, licking his lips and pushing a folder to Martha. This is the first one. It's all just information about your new identity as an Android citizen. We only need the signature on the front page. Everything else is for you. You can read it now and ask questions, or read it on your own time later. Martha picked up the folder and began to leaf through it, not missing the sigh that came from Mr. Park. He no doubt hoped she would choose to read it later. My new name is Echo 2364X. Echo E, phonetic alphabet designation for geographic region of citizenship. But why do I need a new name? Mr. Park held up a finger before sliding another folder forward. That is contained in this file. Martha glanced at it. The title read Martha Billings, and we will need signatures on the first 3 pages of that one, if you don't mind. Martha set aside the first folder and opened the second. It appeared to be a complete dossier on her. There was her birth certificate, her employment records, medical files, and a death certificate. Martha pulled that one out and looked it over. Why does it say I died 3 years ago? Martha exclaimed. She looked up wildly at the government worker before her. I only found out about this situation a month ago. Mr. Park leaned forward and plucked the death certificate from her hand, sliding it neatly back into the file. Martha Billings' death is estimated at 3 years ago, when androids were first known to start replacing average citizens. We can't know for sure because there is no body, but that is the year Mrs. Billings most likely passed away. Martha stared mutely at him for a moment. He licked his lips and nodded his head pointedly to the other files. Martha reached for a folder marked from the courts. She flipped it open and gasped. Robert is divorcing me. Mr. Park hummed. Technically, no. He is merely legally acknowledging the death of his wife and not pursuing a continued relationship with you. Martha's mind struggled under the destruction that statement caused. But Caleb. Mr. Billings will have full custody of Caleb, as is his right as sole parent, and at this time he is not willing to concede any visitation rights for any other parties. Martha sucked in a shaky breath. My son. Mr. Park folded his hands. With respect, Echo 2364X, Caleb is Robert and Martha Billings' son, not yours. Caleb is mine, Martha screamed, flinging the file across the room and standing up so fast the chair toppled behind her. The security guard was at her side in an instant, hands gripping her forearms. Mr. Park remained where he was, completely unfazed. "Please sit, Echo 2364X, he said cordially. "We have a lot more paperwork to get through." The security guard righted the chair, and Martha all but collapsed into it, anger, like her identity, abruptly gone. Mr. Park began collecting the fallen papers, chuckling good-naturedly. "I do wish we could use digital like everything else," he said. "But for obvious reasons, we have to use paper with Android cases. Hacking," he elaborated when he saw Martha's blank face. Martha worked her way mutely through the rest of the paperwork, signing where she was told, but she never read anything more. She already knew what was important. 2 hours and one more security guard later, Mr. Park packed away the last piece of paper and smiled. He never seemed to stop smiling. "Well, that's that," he said brightly. "I'll get this sent over to records tomorrow morning. By the end of the week, you will officially exist. You'll be notified to schedule your marking tattoo. I'm told that they are now available in navy blue and purple if you want something other than black. Then it will probably be a few weeks before you are assigned new housing. Not to worry, though, you are insured to stay here for 6 months if needed. And finally, here is your copy of your rights and privileges as an Android citizen. There are numbers on the back if you have any questions, complaints, or need to file for anything. Now, any questions before we go?" Martha shook her head, even though she couldn't even remember her new name. "Echo something." "I'm so sorry you had to do this, but it's not that bad. The blue was a good choice. Black would have stood out." "It's a barcode on my forehead. It stands out." "Sorry." "That's all right. It's a hard day for you. I completely understand your anger over—" "No, you don't! I'm not angry. I don't know. Why don't you scan my forehead and find out?" It was a big book, a really big book. Martha picked it up and hefted it, trying to gauge its weight. She had never seen such a big book before. Most books were digital, but Martha was always partial to ink and pages. So she had seen and handled her fair share of books, novels, magazines, and textbooks. But this was something else. This was the user manual for herself. Martha supposed that it was useful. It was kind of like taking a biology class or having a medical book handy. In order to care for oneself, one needed to know how they functioned. Humans needed to know. Androids needed to know. And there was a lot of androids that needed to know. The chief engineer on her rehabilitation team had given her the manual weeks ago, a part of her welcome to being an android packet. But Martha had not opened it. She wasn't ready. She didn't know if she was altogether ready now either. But she needed to know more about who she really was. She couldn't go on pretending to be human forever. Martha flipped the book open to a random page and ended up on one that had a complex diagram of something. Martha skimmed over the passage. As android unit requires no actual sustenance for survival, yet it is capable of eating and drinking and eliminating waste, same as human beings. Similar to simultations for emotions and emotional reactions thinking, there are multiple settings and programmed reactions for carbon recycling and waste removal. 1. All food and drink consumed can be eliminated as waste. See page 462, Waste Management. 2. Partial food and drink consumed can be eliminated and the rest recycled to produce various simulations of biological functions, i.e. hair growth, menstrual cycles, sweat, saliva, tear production, etc. Note: this is the default setting for most Android units. See pages 345 to 353, 566 to 571, 674, 822 to 825, or 3. No food or drink is consumed by the Android unit and waste management systems are shut down or removed entirely. See pages 867 to 901, Redundancies and Unnecessary Systems/Functions. The next day, Martha had to ask for a new copy of her user manual. She had simulated vomit all over hers. I'm not sure I understand the point. The point of what? This. Existing, being. I get up, eat food, walk outside, go to sleep, and then do it all over again. If I'm not human, why should I go on pretending to be? Perhaps you shouldn't. But then, what would I be? Something better. Mr. Higgins, the hiring manager, glanced at Martha from over the file, frowned, and then returned his attention to whatever it was he was reading. Martha tried not to tap her foot impatiently. There were only 2 papers in there, and she had been sitting in his office for nearly half an hour. She had been fired from her original job almost as soon as she had become newly aware. True, going back to work was the last thing on her mind, but she had just been feeling better when she broached the subject with her rehabilitation team and received the bad news. She was fired, and as an android, she was no longer allowed certain jobs. Technology was off limits, and so were any positions of significant authority. She couldn't work alongside another android, and she wasn't allowed a salary over the world government's minimum wage. Martha understood the limitations. She had voted on some of them herself. But that was before she realized she would be somebody sitting in a dingy office begging for work that had been beneath her for over 10 years. Finally, Mr. Higgins snapped the folder shut and tossed it carelessly aside. Well, Ms. Whatever, I can't say I have much need for another line organizer. Oh, I understand. But I do need someone in the trash. Excuse me? Trash organizer. The stuff that comes down the chute needs to be put into proper bins, to be burned, recycled, etc. It's the only other Android acceptable job I have here. I'll have to ask my rehabilitation team for approval before. Do you want the trash job or not, bot? Martha flinched. Bot? Not 50 years ago, it was used as a commonplace word for anything electronic and semi-independently mobile. Now it was a curse. Spit in the faces of androids and android supporters. Martha herself had used it blithely in the past, basking in her human superiority. Now it described her. Bot, subhuman, artificial, synthetic, whatever you wanted to call it so long as it wasn't human. No one would have dared call Martha a bot before, and they still wouldn't because Martha was dead. And all that was left was a shell that stole her face and lost her job. I don't got all day, bot. I'll take it. Thank you. Echo, what brings you here? We don't have a session today. I know. I need to ask you a favor. Of course. I have something I need you to deliver. I don't have clearance yet. Deliver to whom? Caleb Billings. No, wait. It's his birthday. I promised him this new holo game ages ago. Robert doesn't know about it. He won't get it for Caleb. I don't need to see him. He doesn't have to know it's for me. There's no card. Please. You know you can't contact him anymore. It's a birthday present for my son. Echo, I'm sorry, but you don't have a son. Martha wasn't stalking. Martha would never do such a thing. Martha was simply sitting on a bench in the park. A park she was allowed to visit 3 times each week if she so desired. She had her handbook with her to show anyone who said she couldn't be there, because she wasn't stalking. Martha heard a bell in the distance, and all the synthetic muscles in her body contracted. Children came pouring out from around the corner where the daycare was located, adults trying in vain to create a coordinated exodus. The park with its playground and hollow boards was a favorite for the kids, and parents found it much easier to pick them up there than in the crowded daycare lot. Martha watched the kids, making sure each one played safely and no one strayed too close to the street. But then a young boy came from around the corner, launching himself with the fearlessness of youth onto the nearest play structure. Caleb. He had grown so much. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, and she dashed them away quickly. She didn't want to draw attention to herself. But her boy. Martha watched him join a group of other kids and start games on the hollow boards. He was beautiful. Parents began filing into the park, some shouting for their children from their cars, others coming into the park to play for a few minutes. A mother walking with her daughter passed by Martha. She saw her glance at her forehead, then looked down hurriedly, ushering her daughter away. Martha put a hand to her forehead, running her fingers across where she knew the blue tattoo was, marking her as an android. She wished she were allowed to wear a hat or style her hair to hide it, but that would defeat the purpose, she supposed. From off to her right, Martha heard a familiar voice shout, "Caleb, let's go! You have swim lessons!" Martha watched Caleb disengage from the hollow game and sprint over to the car where Robert was waiting. If she strained, Martha could hear music coming from the car's radio. Electric String Quartet, her favorite. Then the car door slammed and they were both gone. Neither of them noticed Martha at all. "Who do you spend your time with, Echo?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, we have been meeting together for months now, and you never mention any other people." "I do. I've told you about my boss and my neighbors. All people you do not spend quality time with. Who are your friends? Have you been seeing anyone in a social capacity? Other than you?" "Thank you, but you know I don't count." "Then no. Not even other androids?" "Of course not." "Why?" "I'm not." "You are." "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Martha, for one moment, did not say anything. She just continued to sit, occasionally poking at her bowl of no longer frozen yogurt. No one ever talked to her. "Ma'am?" Martha looked up. A man, a human, a little younger than she, was standing awkwardly, holding a smoothie and pointing to the chair next to Martha. Martha glanced around. The little cafe was indeed full. No, sit," Martha muttered, moving her bag off the seat. "Thanks." The man sat down and pulled out a screen, tapping away on it. Martha found herself staring. She hadn't accessed any technology in months. The man noticed her staring. "I'm David," he said, holding out his hand. "Echo." "Ah, that's one of the cooler android names." Martha immediately glanced down, barely suppressing the self-conscious urge to touch her tattoo. "Oh, I'm sorry," David said awkwardly. "I didn't mean—" "Are you newly aware?" "Oh." Martha had never heard anyone outside the rehabilitation facility using that term before, though to be fair, she never talked to anyone outside the facility either. "I suppose. It's been several months." "Was that rude?" "I didn't mean to be rude," David said. "It's just, I'm a writer for a magazine, and part of what we publish is regarding the aftermath of the war. We have a running column on androids. You interest me." "Thanks." "Not in an objectifying way," David was quick to say. He ran a hand over his face and muttered, "I'm making a total idiot of myself, aren't I?" Martha suddenly laughed, the sound startling her. It was so foreign. "No, it's all right. Ask your questions. I don't mind." And she found she really didn't. David was abrupt, but she relished the attention. She had been so isolated before, she now realized. The doctors and engineers of her team were amiable, but they were there because it was their job. Even her sessions with Audrey bordered on the robotic. It was nice to have someone to talk to her and be interested in her life for no other reason than companionship. It didn't hurt that the man in question was young and attractive either. Frankly, she hadn't felt this good since Martha and Robert first started dating. "I've been told you applied for permission to access the libraries." "Oh yeah, I should hear back by the end of the week." "That's great. I'm happy to see you filling your time. What do you plan on reading?" "Modern history mostly. It's surprising how little I know. The history of the first android, their creation and implementation into our society, their uprising. I mean, you learn history in school, and once you're out of school, you just live it." "True. May I ask why you want to read up on this particular history?" "Because it's mine." Beep, beep, beep. Martha gasped. jumping slightly as the harsh beeping took her by surprise. The other patrons of the market all turned to look at her in confusion and then horror. Martha flushed under their gaze and looked down, standing still obediently as she waited for the proper authorities to come. Sure enough, a short and stocky security guard came over and grabbed her by the elbow, yanking her down to her level so she could scan her tattoo with her screen. "Ow! I'm Shut it, butt!" the security guard snapped, pinching her elbow more firmly. Another beep came from her screen, and she let Martha go, pushing her toward the door. "You've already been here twice this week," she said. "Get lost." "I'm sorry, I didn't realize," Martha said, stumbling to right herself and wishing the other people would look away. "I forgot to buy milk yesterday. Could I just—" "I said get lost, butt!" the security guard shouted, pulling out her electromagnetic rod. Martha could hear the slight hum of it as she waved it in her direction, and she backed up, bumping against the door. "I'm sorry," she breathed out, scanning the other customers for a sympathetic gaze and finding none. "I'm sorry." Martha fled the store, stumbling around the corner and collapsing onto a bench. The faces of the other patrons flashed across her mind's eye. Her data memory, she corrected herself bitterly. She would never be able to forget them now. What a glorious side effect of being an android. She could remember everything, the good, the bad, and especially the ugly. But she couldn't buy milk. Why did she even care? Martha didn't need the milk. She didn't need any food. She had liked food, and eating made her feel human, but now... BBC World News interrupts this program to bring you breaking news of an android attack out of London. Martha looked up at the screen that was playing in the restaurant in front of her. An attractive, middle-aged woman was staring back at her with a grave expression. In the corner of the screen was a still shot of a man in a florist apron wielding a pipe, the caption reading, "Android attack," in bold letters. There hadn't been an attack in Europe for nearly a year. With no access to news feeds, this was Martha's chance to see what was going on in the world, her world. Thoughts of milk forgotten, Martha peered in at the screen and listened. Authorities have released a statement that the android in question had appeared to be completely human when it suddenly went rogue, taking the lives of 3 police officers, 1 bystander, and injuring 6 others before it was neutralized by local authorities. No motive has been announced, but many suspect that this was a leftover directive from the war, and this unit was on standby, disguised as a pedestrian while waiting to be activated for the android war effort. With this latest attack, there is much speculation on how many unaware or worse, aware and undocumented android units are still out there and dangerous. Martha sat back on the bench and let out a breath. Did that android know he was a human before he attacked? He didn't have a barcode, so the government didn't know. Did he plan the attack, or was it some leftover code inside him? Could the same thing happen to Martha? Could she turn against everyone around her? Did a mind made of code really have a choice? Perhaps the grocery store was right to throw her out. Perhaps she was dangerous. Makes you think, doesn't it? Martha glanced to the side, noting a homeless man leaning up against a light pole. Martha gave him a vague smile, not altogether sure he was talking to her. "How many of 'em are out there?" the man continued. "You think we'd know better, seeing as we made most of 'em." He laughed gutturally. "But then how many did them other bots make?" Martha stood and made to move past the man, but his voice floated back to her. "Who made you, bot? Was it God, bot? You ain't from God." "Dr. Neri tells me you took home that pamphlet on body adaptations yesterday. I just wanted to read through it, on my own time, see if anything appealed to me. Any initial thoughts?" "Well, I mean, what woman doesn't want to get rid of her period?" "Aha! First thing I'd do." "But seriously, Echo, what made you change your mind? You were so adamant about keeping your functions intact." "I guess I thought if I didn't change anything, if I kept all the settings as close to human as possible, then I would somehow be human, understandable. And now, it's not that I'm okay with this, but if I can make it better, even in small ways, then I'll be better." "Oh, that makes no sense." "No, it does. I understand." Martha knocked politely on the door of David's apartment, turning her head away from a woman walking down the hall so she wouldn't see her tattoo. Just because David was comfortable with her being an android didn't mean his neighbors would be. The door swung open, and David appeared, smiling and ushering her inside. "Hey, I'm glad you could stop by. Come on in." Martha entered the small studio, noting the scattered quality of David's possessions. There wasn't a surface that didn't have a hollow, a screen, or leftover food. She moved aside a box of takeout and sat down on the couch. "Sorry about the mess," David said, shoving more things out of the way so he could sit too. "It's no problem." And it wasn't. Martha found herself liking it much more than her stark and sterile apartment back at the facility. There was so much more to see here, more to focus on and distract. Martha noticed David was fiddling with some of his screens and wires, and she hesitated. "I'm due to check in at the facility by 3, she said. "I can't stay long." "No worries," David replied, seeming satisfied with whatever he had set up. "That's why I called you here. I know you have a limited amount of time, and that's why we can't meet regularly." "But I do like meeting with you," Martha blurted, feeling suddenly like she was about to receive a breakup speech. "I like meeting with you too," David said. "You've helped me understand so much about what androids like yourself go through in this world." "Now," David continued, "I think it's time we share that with everyone else." Martha blinked. "You want to write a story about me? For the magazine?" David leaned forward and patted his screen. "Not a story, a reality. Your reality as a newly aware pedestrian android." "I'm not sure I understand." "Don't you see, you as an android have something that no human has when it comes to news. Credibility." Martha snorted. "The word of an android is garbage compared to humans. I'm the last credible source out there." "You're talking about opinions. I'm talking about fact." David sat up straighter. "Think about it. When something happens, something illegal, witnesses are called to testify to what they saw, right? Well, sometimes the witness can't recall something, or they lie and no one finds out. It's all up in the air. How do we know what they're saying is the truth?" Martha blinked, still not sure what all this had to do with her. "Sure," she said slowly, "but people will listen to other people, not to androids. If you're planning on interviewing me, no one will believe anything I say." David sighed and sat back. He looked her over carefully for a moment, and Martha felt the hairs on her arms stand up at the attention. "It might be easier to show you," David said suddenly. "Take off your jacket." "What?" "Just pull down your collar and tilt your head to the left, please." Martha, confused, did as she was told. David shifted until he was right next to her and reached out a hand, running his fingers over the skin of her neck, pressing down at certain spots, silent. While the feeling was not unpleasant, Martha's confusion was starting to outweigh her pleasure. "David!" "There!" David pressed a finger hard into her skin, and Martha felt something give a little inside her. Then she couldn't move. Martha remembered fear when the war broke out and the first humans were slaughtered. She remembered contemplating her own death when she first came face to face with a rogue android. And she certainly recalled the chaos when she found out she was an android. But this was something else. 1,000 sirens went off throughout her body that only she could hear. The kind of warning that only rears its head when the host's very survival is at stake. Martha could not move, could not speak, but she still had sensation. David removed something from her and suddenly began inserting the wires that he had attached to his screen. He hummed meaningless platitudes to her, assuring she was all right, perfectly safe, and it would be over in a minute. "Finished!" David's screen beeped in concurrence, and he finally slid away to give that his attention. Martha sat, waiting for movement to return. It did not. "Look!" David held the screen up so she could see it. Thousands of lines of coded android language and files filtered across the screen. It was going too fast for Martha to translate much of it, but she understood enough to realize it was her. David had downloaded her databank. "Now the world will know firsthand what you've experienced," David said, looking back down at the screen. "No one will be able to dispute it because it isn't a feeling or an opinion or even a normal thought. It's data. This could change android-human relations completely." The screen beeped again, apparently complete, and David moved back toward her to remove the wires. For the first time since her awareness, Martha deliberately recalled back in perfect memory what she had seen on that little screen. Her whole life summed up in lines of code that only took mere seconds to download. The sum of her parts could fit onto that screen and show her worth to the world as a cluster of data without feelings or opinions or real thoughts. Her memories, just memory. That was how the world would view her. How David did view her. All better? The final wire was removed, and Martha felt the ability to move return to her slowly. She waited, and David sat back on the couch looking contrite. "I hope you aren't mad," he said, "but that was the best way for me to show you what I meant. And technically, as a human journalist, I do have the right to requisition the memory banks of androids for the purposes of a story. Kind of like research, you know." Martha said nothing, flexing her fingers and standing. David stood as well. Don't be mad. I'm doing this to better your life. If the world knew what you had to go through, things would change. Not just for you, but for androids everywhere. This is a good thing, a sacrifice for the greater good. Martha's fist collided with David's side, catapulting him across the room. He lay on his side, groaning, ribs most definitely broken. But Martha didn't stop to be sure. She opened the door to his apartment, breaking the handle, and walked out. When she reached the street, she ran. "I'm not going to lie, Echo, this isn't good. The man in question isn't pressing charges, but I still have to submit an evaluation to the board along with the engineers and the programmers. Do you know what that means? The board is talking about wiping your program, unmaking you. Is that such a bad thing? Do you really believe you're better off not existing, Echo?" Martha did. She walked down the line, skimming over the names quickly. She wasn't allowed to know the location. She had turned down her right. But now she needed to see, to make what she knew in her mind a reality. She turned down the second row. It wasn't all that hard to find out which cemetery to go to. She had the memories, after all. It was supposed to be Martha's parents. Robert would have known that. She turned down the third row and stopped. Martha Ann Billings, beloved wife and mother, patriot of humanity. She frowned, mouthing the words as she read them, and then going down on her knees and pressing one hand to the carvings on the stone. It didn't feel real. She trailed her hand down the stone and over the grass, wet with dew, digging her nails into the dirt beneath. She almost wished there was a body, a rotted skeleton that she could see and identify as this person, this Martha. She could not get Martha out of her head. She had her memories, but not really. The more she existed with this new awareness, the more she realized how artificial she really was. She could remember when Caleb was born to Martha and remember the feelings assigned to that memory was a joy. But she could not feel it, only know it. She knew Martha loved Caleb, but she couldn't find that love anywhere apart from Martha's memories of him. She couldn't even remember Martha's death. There was nothing in her databank about it. Would her own deletion be remembered, recorded? Would she be given a stone like Martha? She hated that Martha existed in a way she never could. She hated that this woman owned everything there was worth owning about her, and that she was left with scraps, a pittance in comparison to a life's worth stored away for someone else. She pressed her face down into the grass, bowing before her human counterpart. Echo hated Martha, and that hate was her own. Now the discussion questions. Number 1. Has Martha successfully cheated death, been born into a living hell, or something in between? Is it correct to say Martha is dead? 2. Is Echo alive? Does Echo deserve the rights of humans? At what point, if any, does a sentient being deserve equal rights? How would you test if they met your threshold? 3. Should Echo have the legal right to terminate her existence, or should that right only be held by the government or others? 4. Is it simply the nature of society to have a low-wage underclass that does the work that is too difficult, too dirty, or too dangerous for others to do? If that is true, are androids the perfect creation to fill those roles? And 5. What would you do if you were Echo? Would you seek out your old family? Start a new life? Join a movement, violent or peaceful, for android rights? Next week, we'll be reading Starstruck by E.L. Tenenbaum. If you enjoyed this story, head over to our companion podcast, After Dinner Conversation Discussions, and listen to our discussions of this and other short stories from our magazine. We will include a link in the description. And of course, you can always continue the discussion on our webpage, in the comments section, or on our Facebook page. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.